It's my pleasure to be here today with all of you. I've had the wonderful opportunity to meet a couple groups since this morning and being able to get some insights through the questions as to what's on everyone's mind, and that's been really important. Justin introduced me. I'm the Deputy CIO, the Associate CIO at American. It's my first higher ed role. I've been at American for 13 years. Before that, Cummins Engines, Capital One, did warehouse manufacturing back in the day for systems for PepsiCo. So always dealing with a lot of intersection of the technology and business transformation. I come to you today, this is our topic, how can digital transformation lead and support student success? So I'll take some minutes to walk you through, and then hopefully we'll have some time to take questions. We'll have a lot of time to take questions. So with that, here is today's student. This is not a picture that surprises anybody. These are our students who are coming to our campuses today. They are the iPhone and mobile phone Android generation. Amazon, Google, Netflix, YouTube, when they have questions. They used to always call IT department for tech questions. Now they Google and look at it on YouTube. Actually, some videos, we have Microsoft Office 365. Students have questions. Our newer millennial staff coming to the workplace, they have questions. They look up YouTube to see how it's done. And then they call IT. So this is our students coming to today's campus. And my takeaway from this is not that it's a new slide. It's been kind of sort of overused in different ways, but they're used to personalized, they're used to customized, they're used to instantaneous everything, and they're used to massive social exchanges. That's them. That's who we are teaching. Also, here are some other stats about our student body. They're more diverse. If you look at the comparative poverty, that's between 1996 and this data is from 2016, that actually increased to 20%. And this other study is probably the one that got to me most. It's a stressed generation. This is real study. This is from the last 12 months, where 80+% of them are overwhelmed, very sad, overwhelming anxiety, and look at that, 51.7% hopeless. So it's not what we want, but it's what we have. That's the individual coming into today's campuses. As much as this is there, we're dealing with 51% and 80+% of anxiety. So when we start thinking about student success, and I use the term breaking it down, let's kind of see what that means to today's students. So first thing, they are here to enable learning and get whatever successful grades means to them and to the learning system, faculty, the administration, academic policy and regulations. And they get to graduate, and then we want them to have the career, be the citizens that they're meant to be, and impact change in the world. Well, this is very good. However, learning is done different. It's much more non-traditional than it ever used to be. We always talk about flipped classroom, where we send the material ahead of time, because we want to impact the students of today. We don't want to impact the students when I went into college, late 80s. That's not who we are today. So learning is done completely different. Grades are still absolutely very important, but we're dealing with the generation that wants them instantly. So they don't want to go through a portal and a 7-click process to get to know their grades. They don't want to get confused because there was an assignment and it says 12 a.m. and they email, and the email get to the faculty timely. They just want to go someplace and upload, and there is an assignment task that says what it is, and it says 11:59 p.m. and after that it's poof and gone, and they exactly know what they did. Learning's different to them. Getting grades are much more instantaneous. They want that personalized feedback. And they absolutely want to get to the job market and get to the job. They have many choices. They have many choices in the multidisciplinary academic programs that they could do. and they have many choices in the jobs that they could get. So part of campus's role is to guide them into picking and choosing their choices, because they have numerous ones. When I was a computer science and engineering graduate, again, we're talking late 80s, early 90s, I had numerous choices too, but they were very similar. I wasn't picking and choosing between 15 things that could completely be different. So multiple choices are great, except they take people more time to navigate and choose. So, but that's not all. It's beyond grades. So we want to think of student success, but student success is typically a subset of the student experience. And what's the student experience? It's the sum total of all the interactions that a student will have with the university. So think about that, sum total of all the interactions. If they have an issue with the bill, that's an interaction. They wanted a course, and they couldn't get to the course. That's an interaction. They had a question, they went to one of the very many student support groups. That's an interaction. If they're doing an internship or have a job part-time someplace on campus, that's an interaction. That's what they're taking away. That's what they're getting out of it. Everyone I've talked to, I've met three of our presidential interns between yesterday and today. And each one of them, they're not me. I got my grades, I did a great job. I had an active social life, I had a boyfriend. That's all I had to navigate when I was in college. That's all I was doing. As motivated and passionate I am today, those are two things primarily that I was doing when I was in college. Then eventually I got an internship and I got jobs. Each of you are today doing multiple different things. I was amazed of the number of things that you guys are doing. But that's our students today. They're driven, they're passionate in different way. They know and they keep tabs more into stuff, and it's the sum total of the interactions that they're taking away. And this is a comment from student focus groups at American University, but I put it up there for you to consider, because American has a high enough graduation rate with ways to improve still. And what our students told us, our retention rates is high, but again, we got ways to go. Our students told us that they thrive, they want to thrive the campus experience, but instead they survive the campus experience. So yes, our retention rates are there. Yes, we see the graduation rates, but what they walk away with is not necessarily a thriving experience. And they want to, they're asking for it. And finally, because if you get to the engaged alumni, that has huge implications. We talk about lifelong learning, we talk about fundraising, we talk about development, we talk about how they become the influencers moving forward, because if they are engaged alumni, it connects back to the whole life cycle. That's who will get the next batch of students to be excited about UVU. So I break down the student success equation into phases. Or into bite-sized, these are not bite-sized, these are impressive tasks by themselves, but we want to get to all of this. We want to get to this whole life cycle. I have one other data fact for you, which is this. If you look into, that is from the American Council of Education, and it says that's what universities are chartered to do. That's what all of us are here to do. They're not saying that we need to get the students' grades and get them to graduate and give them good jobs. They're saying that we need to care about the student as a whole, that our job is the development of the student as a person rather than just the intellectual training alone. Any guesses which year this was written? Any? One. Come on.
2019.
Okay. Yes, that's American Council of Education. That was written in 1937. So the question is, it's not a new thing. It's a new thing because we never really did deliver on that fully. And in today's digital world, which is far more converged, far more hyper, and far more instantaneous, it becomes an issue. It becomes part of the digital divide. So now we talked a little bit about today's student, what does student success mean? And then let's talk about this digital transformation and student success. Why do we want to care? We definitely want them to graduate. And we want them to graduate in a timely manner. And I want to talk about this and this thing, the stress with the red kind of no-no. Go back to the first slide where we said 51% of the students are feeling hopeless, 80+% are feeling overwhelmingly anxious and overwhelmed and that sort of thing. We don't want to stress anymore a stressed out generation. So that's who they are. We're not going to change that. That's the impact of the digital age. And so if we could make tasks simpler for them so that they could really focus on why they are here, principally to learn, to engage. Any campus has a vast amount of resources, immense. It's like a city. Any interest, we can find somebody who's doing something here. That's what we want our students to do. We want them to learn to engage in the things that they really care about so that they can figure out who they want to be multiple times over in their lives. We want them to grow up as people who are bold and who can work with their purpose, mission, and conviction. That's what we're wanting to do. We don't want them to stress about their financial aid not showing up in their bill. We really don't. We don't want them to run around to 4 offices saying, oh, is this an internal scholarship or an external scholarship, and when will it show up, and when will I get it? And you're saying I can pay this lesser amount now, but then my bill says past due, and you're saying it's okay. We don't want them to have to think about all of this. Because they're graduating today, they're not graduating when I graduated. And even when I graduated, I wasn't worried about all of this. I figured it was happening. I could focus on why I was there. So we want them to graduate. We want them really to focus on their core mission, and we don't want to stress them out anymore. So the second thing is online banking. So I had a phenomenal experience when I was at Capital One. We called it direct banking. So it was late 90s. And no, I wasn't a vice president at Capital One. It has 7,000 ITs. So our CIO wanted it, but none of our vice presidents wanted to do it because they didn't think it was viable, that it was worth it. They didn't want to do that. And eventually, we flew in this guy from Australia, and he led the direct banking, the first online banking implementation. I was part of the project, and I was part of the change. And we look what happened today. 92% of millennials, they choose a bank based on its digital service set. That's what they do. I can ask any one of you, if you found a bank that has no real online presence, you probably would think twice about what's going on with this bank. So something that starts out as an additional service, as an additional channel, soon becomes the norm. And we saw that with banking. I have numerous other examples. Banking's the one I felt personally, so I throw that up for you. So what we're talking about, digital and student success and all this, pretty soon it's going to be a baseline expectation. And we're just not going to be able to shy away from that. This picture, I thought it was showing, if we had more time, I would ask you each of these pictures meant, but we don't. So this one, I thought it shows competitiveness. And my point about that is, if you look at, I'm part of American University, and that university has had ambitious plans. If I look at UVU, there's a lot of ambitious plans. The enrollment growth has been very, very good, and there is more ways to go. What does that mean? That we have to get better at experimenting quickly to say, here's something new I want to try out. Will this work? It's a different model. It's a different program. The first time I was at American, it took us 18 months to propose a new program and then take it through all the bodies we had to take it, and then get it to the point that the program could be sanctioned and out there. Then it took 6 months on top of that to market it and get students for the program. 2 years from inception to starting the classes, that's too long. We cannot do that. You compare that to Southern New Hampshire University or Arizona State University. Southern New Hampshire has 3,700 close to 4,000 students that are actually on site, on premise, and well over 100,000 students that's purely online. Arizona State is the other way around a little bit, but they have about 106, I think, or non-traditional, it's 136,000. And about 40% of that is online students. So they found new market opportunities because they were able to experiment, figure things out, and get to that competitive space. If it takes us too long, at American University, first time a few years back, we were trying to we were trying to create a second academic calendar. Because for online, there's a different calendar, and the traditional calendar is still the same. And it took us 7 to 8 months to do this. It was long. We had programs that started without the calendar in place. We had to jerry-rig and do things on the side and manually and back-end to do that. That's too much. At that pace, we can experiment only 1 or 2 big capabilities a year. That's going to make us less competitive. And, finally, that's the Netflix versus Blockbuster. I don't have to tell you any more about this. The point is, something that starts out being a convenience and an additional channel quickly becomes the norm, quickly becomes the basis of competitive advantage, and sometimes might lead into obsolescence. And that's why we need to get and say, we are in the digital age, what could we do to embrace it and get to the other side and actually embark on looking at the opportunities ourselves. So why is it so difficult? That, I thought, represented the stovepipes and the silos in a university. So I learned about higher ed after I started working for American, and I learned that the structure, the basic structures in a university, that was set up like 1893 to 1910. The concept of shared services, 1920. And so, you were dealing with a structure, this divisions, deans, tenure, all of this was early 90s. The Higher Ed Act was later in the day, but still 1965. But the basic structure, tenured faculty, governance, all of this was somewhere between that 1893 and like 1910 to 1920. That's how far back that goes. Now, starting about 1920s and 1930s, the divisions started shaping up. And by the divisions, I mean all the support divisions that are running the university: registrar's office, campus life, residence groups, finance. And all those divisions started having their own associations and trade journals and accreditation bodies. But there are conferences, and there are conferences for practically every division. The registrar's group, they have ACRO. We have, IT has EDUCAUSE, that is technology and academia. Each one of these groups, there is an association of orientation leaders. And these are good. They're coming in and they're sharing best practices. But they're polishing and sharing best practices within the silo. They're polishing the very silo that does exist. And as much as it is good, the problems we have today are not siloed problems. I'll give you 2 examples. One is American decided that we needed to diversify our student body. And this was a few years back. And they said, we're going to take students who are eligible for Pell Grants, and we're going to go recruit more from California, West Coast. What we didn't realize, or rather what we didn't think about intentionally, is the impact of that on retention. And retention fell. At a time when we were investing to increase retention, it went the other way. So the right answer is not, stop diversifying the student body, stop taking Pell Grants, stop going to California. That would be a step in the wrong direction. What we have to figure out is how to have that, and how to have interventions to help that student who's from California 5 generations, and he's or she's the only one here, and this individual student is feeling homesick. How do we manage that? How do we set up a structure that helps him or her navigate that feeling? Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. So it's a matter of designing a system that's going to get us to the end, not necessarily one or the other, which is a layered problem. The other one, it's not necessarily, it is a layered problem, but it's a problem that involves multiple disciplines to come together and do a different design. I'll give you another example. we're trying to diversify our international student base too. It used to be much more, and over the years it's not where we want it to be, so we have a focused effort on that. Well, that's great. However, we have a lot of students, it turns out we have a partnership with Shorelight, and a lot of students are coming from China, but these students want to go back to China. And that impacts, for the business school, how the career numbers look. So what should we do? The answer is not either or. The answer is to figure this out so we get both. We're going to be international. We're going to recruit from every country that wants to come and study in US. But then what we need to do is figure out how to manage the impact. And in some cases, it is accepting what we want to be and then ignoring implications to what we don't care. So that's the strategy part, is if we're saying we're strategic and these are the 4 things we care about, we should be bold enough to say we're okay accepting the impact to number 5 and number 6. Traditionally, universities are not very great at doing that. So it's a picture of the silos, and that's what Victor Baldrige said in 1971 in his book. He said, the power structure of the university is loose, ambiguous, shifting, and poorly defined. So imagine trying to do large-scale technology and transformation and student success and digital. We're not going to change that overnight. We need to accept that and figure out how to work within that. Because I have worked in corporations. Top-down is not always the greatest. It gets us where we want to be. It doesn't institute long-lasting organizational change. We don't want to do that. We want to figure out how to preserve academic freedom, how to preserve this air where people have the freedom to innovate, to present their ideas, but we want to figure out how decision-making works there. We can't be all things all at all times. And that's the governance part. That's how do we come together as a community? How does decision-making work? How is decision-making different from ideation? And can we explain to each other why this was picked and not that? And that brings me to this last part, which is the change paradigm. We want to move from these siloed systems to integrated systems. My favorite one is data of interest to actionable information. I get inundated. We like this data. We want to see this data. That's interesting, and we can get very lost in a sea of data of interest, and then we'll be struggling even more to say what matters and why. And so how do we get to that point? A synchronous flow of information. A lot of my knowledge of American in my early days was just being out there and talking to people. And I think that is healthy and should stay. But that shouldn't be the official way we're getting work done. I used to joke that when I walked on campus, I would hear about projects. That was not a good method. Walk on campus, I should be talking about projects to say, hey, that's going well. But I shouldn't be catching projects as I walk down the halls. So what's our information flow? Hierarchical decision making, there's times and places for this, but not every decision needs to go from individual one to their manager, to their director, to their vice provost, and then their vice provost calls the other vice provost, and then it comes all the way down. That conversation could have happened very easily at the right levels. And if it's a $100 decision, we need to figure out who makes the decision there versus if it's a $100,000 decision versus if it's a $1 million decision. Enterprise deployments are great, but we're in an age software. This is a good thing. Luckily for all of us, technology has morphed and changed. There is very, very neat pieces of technology and software there. We don't have to do monolithic large deployment where we stop and pause everything and take systems offline for 7 days. We can get to enterprise thinking, but agile deployment. So the enterprise thinking is very important because without that, we run the risk of doing bite-sized stuff that won't add up. But we can do large-scale thinking with small-scale targeted deployments that add value immediately. Because remember, we're dealing with a generation that is craving for that instantaneous value. Lend the orchestration to rapid experimentation. I talked about this a little bit, about the example where how long it took to get the curricular approved. We want to preserve the parts of the process that make sense. We want to figure out where asynchronous collaboration works and where synchronous collaboration can be used. Because at the end of the day, the cycle time between inception to implementation needs to be carefully evaluated. And that's not a technical task. It's a task for the entire campus to come together and look at. And this is the end, which I talk about. Let's not get carried away by the buzzwords, because being in tech my entire career, I have heard several buzzwords. And transformation is a great word. Digital is a great word. Digital is also very real. The question is, sometimes upgrades and enhancements are good enough. It doesn't have to always be a transformation. So can we be intentional about when we need the upgrade, when enhancements are pretty good enough, versus when we need to truly transform the systems or the landscape. Focus on a strong foundation. And by foundation, it's definitely, I'm a technology standing in front of you. I definitely mean technology foundation at a minimum, but a foundation that is process, data, and policies apart from and aside from tech. If we don't have a strong foundation, we cannot extend. I'll give you an example. We were dealing with this a month back, and it was a simple question. How many of our donors are alumni? This should be a very simple question. There should be one definition of donor, one definition of alumni, and we should point and click and get this answer. Except it wasn't, because the online programs define alumni in a different way. Donor is defined in a different way by different divisions, and in the end, it was a massive discussion that lasted 3 weeks. To pull the numbers, it took us 2 hours. But to get the definitions right, to define the business rules, it took us over 3 weeks. And that was work done fast, because we got people together. We were like, you're going to have to define this answer, because there's a deadline, an external agency that needs this answer. If that foundation is not strong, everything we project and extend from that foundation will be incorrect, partly, or it's a hit or miss. It's tougher than tech. It's skill set, mindset, policies. A lot of times it will involve us to look and change policies. It's definitely a skill set change. In an earlier discussion, I gave the example of my Lotus Notes administrator when I changed to Microsoft Office 365, how her role changed and how her power in terms of, she was well known in the industry. She was well known by IBM, seeked her out. But when I moved to Microsoft, she became one of many. So it was an organizational plus. She had no problem navigating it, but I have to acknowledge what it meant to her. And then how am I going to make this different from her? I'm not saying that she needs to get that same visibility inside Microsoft, but what could she do that gets her back some of what she lost in a different capacity? And that takes time to discuss. And finally, my last pitch on this is, it's always about value creation, outcome, and impact. Digital is a means to the outcome and impact and value creation. It is still about graduation rates. It's still about finding the right jobs for our students and getting them to where they need to be. So eyes on the ball, those are a North Star. And we want to focus on that. Digital, yes. Outcomes, more important. And that's it. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we have a few minutes for questions. I'll go ahead and moderate, and I'm happy to shut you down if your question's totally inappropriate. Just kidding. We're professionals, so we'll make sure that we give plenty of time for questions. If you want to grab this mic, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jeff Johnson. I'm the Director of Institutional Effectiveness Planning and Accreditation Support. And I want to prod you a little bit and go a little deeper on your idea of rapid experimentation. We're not just experimenting with value creation that affects the bottom line, the shareholder value, that kind of thing. We're experimenting with students, and so that raises questions about what are our responsibilities in that way. And I think a really good example to contrast that contrasts well with your Southern New Hampshire and Arizona State examples is the example of Udacity. This was for those not familiar with it, Udacity was a micro-credential company run by Sebastian Thrun. It was a major player in the massive open online courses, and after a while, when Thrun saw that the courses were running at very low completion rates and very low pass rates, he basically shut down Udacity, pivoted it to a corporate training platform, and as a result, called it in Fast Company a lousy product. Now, in our case, in education, we have students who have, literally put their money on a MOOC, and now it's not there. So how do we do rapid experimentation while managing the effects of the failed experiments with our students?
So first this is where the student engagement in the right groups, where we are thinking and crafting these, is critically important. We want to make sure students are part of these dialogues and discussion. We also have, here's the thing, there has been Udacity. There has been things we want to watch and learn and avoid. And that's kind of the nice thing of being in 2019 is we can pick and choose and say that's not who we want to be. There is a time and place for, and there is other models. We can think there is Udemy. There is a platform called Skillshare where for a very, very small amount of money, I think it's like $15, $20 a month, and you get tons and tons of material on it. I think there is a place for that. But we differentiate. When we're a university, a campus, we go back to ACE 1937. We're different from that. So in the experimentations, we want to preserve our core. And I go back to this thing, is the foundation has to be preserved. There is a reason education, higher ed systems are there. We exist for a reason, that 1937 reason. We want to preserve that. And then we want to experiment, sometimes at the core, sometimes at the fringe, but be very clear. Is it an experimentation on the fringe where we're just creating a new channel, we're extending a new program? Or is it actually a core fundamental part where we are saying we're going to play with a new, different business model? We're playing with a new way to provide the same course. And this goes back to this level of intentionality I would love for our campuses to have, because it's engaging and it's clarifying. And we can pick and choose. The other thing I learned from Capital One, and I haven't yet found a university where I've been able to model this, so I'm looking for this, is Capital One was very clear about the level that they're experimenting. Is it the fringe or the core, or is it somewhere in the middle? And they were also very good about cutting their losses. So they would experiment with micro parameters for credit cards, and they would say, there's a credit card with a certain thing on the plastic, a certain image. It's only going to go out to Ohio, doctors in Ohio between the age of 25 and 40, and we're going to see how it does. And if it didn't do whatever they were projecting, it was failed and gone. But at the end, they would get the products. They only had, back when I was there, it's different right now, they only had 52 business lines, but they experimented about 50 different options a year. So imagine and Rich Fairbanks said this, like how much of it they learned from the failures, but the failures were not hyper big. They were small enough where they could learn and incorporate it into the final product. And higher ed is extremely different from this. We're not gonna play with a parameter or something and put it out there, because we have a very, very sacred obligation to the students, and this is what you said. So can we take that mindset, preserve the core, and then figure out what it means, and then clarify the level we're doing, what we want to get, and the implications of that. So that's how I would think about it.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Bob Palais, chair of the math department. Thanks for your great presentation. And I looked at American University faculty web pages, and they're wonderful. They have this wonderful directory page that has their names in the URL. And then it links to another thing which is beautifully called EdSpace.
Yes.
And that's fantastic. It's pro education, really helps the students.
Yes.
here we've had a problem where we haven't been able to have faculty web space, and now it's been replaced with something with a URL, encrypted URL, that's longer than the directory itself. And it's led to things I got from the chair of the political science department hosts his courses on his own personal site. I got one from a biology professor. This is unanimous across. So I'm reduced to paying out of pocket for my own site so as to not be professionally embarrassed by the UVU website. I even use the biography section below my web mugshot to point this out. This directory page is terrible. Please go here instead. It's a issue that I'm hoping you could lead us to something like EdSpace and great directory pages. Is that a kind of thing that you would be able to make? Because this is unanimous across our, at least science faculty, so that we can highlight our wonderful teaching and have a web presence that we're not.
Right. I got it. So the short answer is absolutely, we did that for AU. The context to that answer is we're digital citizens too. We may have a different pace of adoption than the generation that grew up from the year 2000. But we're digital citizens too. So the same things that in the first slide when I said, look at Amazon, look at this world of choices, look at the level of personalization, look at choices that for watching a movie now, they could go to Amazon Prime and Netflix and or Hulu. They got 3 great choices and then the plenty that I'm not naming. We're used to that too. And so the dilemma for enterprise, and if you think of it as a complex problem, is to find the right equation that serves us to say, what's the balance of choices? What's the balance of cost? And so when enterprise IT pushes us, and I've done this to a single choice, mostly is because it takes cost to support multiple choices. But what if instead of looking at it as a single yes or no, that I'm capping that I have this money and that's all I got, except that's not true. I could go out and say, to serve our faculty in the way they need to be served, this is ideally what we need. And then this is the cost for that. Now let's work off of that to say, what are you going to tweak and where do you land from that? But we want to begin with an answer that is not constrained and then start putting the constraints on that. And so that would be an approach, and there we will land into multiple choices. But I think on behalf of the IT department, I would say it usually comes with added support cost, and we want to figure that out too.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Landry Hawkins. I'm from Desktop Support. I was just curious if you could tell me if what changes you're going to make within the next year within IT, if any. I know it's early, but just curious if you had a vision on that.
I wish I can give you some generic answers, the right way to do this. So the questions that I'm getting from everybody is giving me a sense of what the balancing parameters will need to be. Okay, so that's what I'm getting a sense of. What I know about IT from everything I've read and the individuals I've met so far is a lot of things have been done right. But there is, in the morning, somebody asked, there's still a lot of operational fires. And if you're fighting operational fires, it's not time. Your brain doesn't switch to become strategic just because you have an hour between 2 operational firefighting episodes. And so the way to do this first is I've got to have enough time to listen and assess with everybody the context. The context is the context. What I bring in is my lenses, my perspective to offer to that context, and I need time to do that. But one of the things, and this is always true in any place, if somebody came over and into my role at AU, they would still do this, is there is always operational efficiencies to be gained. Always. And you want to make sure that there is an effort to do that, because minus a solid effort on that, we're never really going to have the time to be strategic. So imagine my work in the first 90 days, I would say, and then the next 9 months is really three things. One is a lot of active listening and with IT folks and the campus community. The second, I would say, is finding where the operational efficiencies can begin. One of the things I asked AU when I first joined is, what are the top 10 areas where things are not redundant? Always a question that gives me great answers. And depending on the level of maturity of operations, you get things here versus here, but you always get 10 and then some. And we want to focus an effort to pair off some of that and get them off the table. And then we want to start building the strategy, which is usually a very, very collaborative because it's an engaging activity. And the strategy, the sharing of the strategy is the final step. The building is the real work. And you've got 200 people plus in IT. If you add full-time, part-time, that's an effort. We want to think about what the big blocks are, but we can think of that together. So I think that's an approach versus a specific answer. I wish I could tell you, keep your ERP or change your ERP, but that would be wrong of me to try to even comment on that. We're also an Ellucian client, by the way, and we have Ellucian colleague, and for the most part, it works well.
Hi, I'm Aaron. I'm a systems administrator in IT operations, and we're a relatively young department. And we also strive for operational efficiencies. Most of the time we're working collaboratively with other areas to all come together and improve a practice. And when we're trying to describe where we're at and where we want to be, we run into those same issues where we spend a lot of time debating the definition of different terms. Do you have any strategy or values or principles or guidance on how you can make that first step of all getting on the same page about terminology a lot more efficient, make it happen more rapidly?
Give me one example of a term that causes debate. Incident management, okay. Okay, fair enough. So I'll work with that. Okay, so there are industry level definitions that we can borrow from. So one good method is to say, okay, the industry practices exist for a reason. People have toiled and worked hard and figured this out. We may hate it, but can we all look at that as a starting point and then say, what aspects to be? So kind of going back to your question, can we start with that and say what we disagree? ITIL defines incident management for us and say we're smarter than ITIL. But can we start with that and say, what do we not like? What doesn't apply to our campus? One of the things, again, Capital One CEO would say all the time, Rich Fairbanks, is he hated best practices because he said that it was created, he had a lot of ego. He said it was created by mediocre companies striving to be best. And if you have to break the norm, you can't succumb to that, was what he would say. So he's Rich Fairbanks, I'm not. And I'm saying, if you want to start with the terms and the definitions and pick and choose what won't apply or what's harder for us to get to. So maybe we want to have a more basic definition. And then, again, clarify what is necessary versus what is aspirational. And maybe there is a phased way of getting there. Oftentimes when these debates happen, I find that our campus IT partners are really telling us, you're striving to get IT orchestration and automation, and I can't get an image for my arts faculty that they want. So you want me to be here, but you haven't solved my problem here. And once you get that clarity, then we meet them there, we solve it. We can dumb down the definition sometimes or make it bigger. And that's a strategy. And thank you for offering incident management as the example.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Donna Malakovich, Senior Director of Community Outreach, and we are piloting a Salesforce implementation in our area. Can you tell us if American University uses Salesforce or what your experience is with that?
American University uses end-to-end CRM. We went with Ellucian and partnered very, 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 very heavily with Ellucian on this because their product was not as mature but here's the value. They're 27 miles from the campus. I got a support from everybody, including their president. She engages with us very effectively. So we were able to get the CRM, recruit, and then advise and advance. And these products are humming and working well. I believe every 6 years, and this could be sort of arbitrary, but 6 is kind of a good guideline. Every 6 years, enterprise platforms need to be reevaluated. We don't need to change, but we need to re-opt in. And so Ellucian knows that probably towards the end of 2020, we are going to go into another round of evaluation to say, is Ellucian CRM still the right platform for us? Where is Salesforce? Where is other platforms that are coming up, more up and coming ones? So I have evaluated Salesforce. I haven't hands-on worked with it. I think it's a great tool. I think the resourcing could be different. The reason American picked Ellucian was because we got all the integrations out of box, and that cut down on initial integration cost very heavily and ongoing cost too. But Salesforce is a very good product.
What has been your experience or preference with working with either with a centralized IT structure versus a decentralized IT structure?
So I have experience with both, and it's in corporations and it's in higher ed, and so I'll throw two principles maybe for principally to think of. One is, how is work getting done, and do we know how that Baldrige comment, do we know how decisions are being made? And do we know how we come together to create the whole, but then what are we individually accountable for? And if we can answer that question, that's fundamentally important. Doesn't matter where we report it up through. If you and I, if let's say you're in a unit and I'm in central, as long as we can figure out what's the whole we are creating and what part are you uniquely responsible for, what part am I uniquely responsible for, that's the hardest part. If we got there, see, then we are in a good delivery mode. Then we can get out of some of the confusion that happens. And the second part is, are we optimized? And is that the right model? And that's where you bring in the question of central versus decentral. And it's always a careful balance. Central can get, if there is optimized delivery, optimized services, central works great. But you never want to be 100% central. You absolutely need to have local technology presence, because technology is very pervasive. My best example is, think of the marketing job and how that's changed. There is tons of marketing analytics and marketing tools that enterprise IT sometimes get into and sometimes doesn't need to get into. There's a tool called BrandWatch that provides brand sentiments and what are people saying. Does IT need to get into that? No. And so, where do we draw the line? If there is university data, we need to carefully evaluate what is going to happen to that data. Is it protected? That's not a central role. That's a policy and security, and typically central people are good at evaluating that. The roles can belong anywhere as long as we figure out how to have delivery that we can be accountable for, and then the optimized way of looking at that. Web is another great example where there's been a shifting of balance to central, decentral, back and forth. And over time we realized, content publishing as an activity, it's great, it's pervasive, it needs to be in the news. We don't want to create maybe an army of content publishers, unless we can do so and provide them better career paths. So those are some of the ways to think about it.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you very much for your presentation.
You're very welcome.
We're very grateful to have you here.
I appreciate the questions.
Thank you.